I've just started reading Love in the Time of Global Warming, which I mentioned before on this channel, and I am 64 pages in, and I'm loving it. And I'm getting all of the classics feels, so this is just going to be a little bit of a ramble on some stuff that this has been making me think about, because I think I'm going to love this anyway, because I love Greek mythology stuff, we know this. However, there is a very specific thing that I'm enjoying about this so far, and that is, essentially, if you don't know what this book is about, I'm not very far into it yet, so I don't really know what it's about either, but it is sort of a reworking of the Odyssey, sort of post-apocalyptic insofar as, due to like global warming, there appears to have been some big epic disaster, the world seems to be kind of flooded, don't really know what's going on yet, think we'll find out. And our main character is called Pen, which I'm assuming is a link to Penelope. And she's essentially going on a journey. She's sort of guided by a copy of the Odyssey, sort of just the events that she's experiencing are reflecting the Odyssey. So it's already got this really interesting aspect, I think, insofar as it's not a simple retelling of the Odyssey, because the Odyssey exists in the world, which I find very interesting, and I'm intrigued to see how this will go. But there's a very specific aspect of this which I am particularly enjoying at the moment. Not really spoilers, just where I'm at with the plot, is we have had essentially the equivalent of the Sirens encounter with it, and Pen says, "I'll tell you a story." This is something that she's done a couple of times already, bearing in mind I'm not very far into it yet, and I love it, okay? As a start point, storytelling is something which is intrinsically related to ideas of power and relationships with power. And it's why I never entirely trust first-person narrations of stories, because if you are the narrator, you have full control over what details you give. And even if you're not maliciously changing what happens to fit to make you look better, you sort of subconsciously do it anyway, so you're automatically biased. But specifically, storytelling in regards to ancient Greece and sort of classical studies text type things is what I want to talk about today in this super quick video. Because during my second year of uni, I did a module on ancient epic where we pretty much just looked at the Iliad and the Odyssey. I then continued that on in my final year, and I was very Iliad based. These are two texts which are sort of founding narratives of our culture, and they are ones that are based on the idea of oral storytelling. The Iliad and the Odyssey pretty definitely started off life as oral texts. They are oral traditions that will have grown and will have been embellished as time's gone on, and now they've become written down, which is why we still have them. But they are part of this tradition of storytelling that was a primarily oral thing to do. And storytelling has importance within them. One thing I find very interesting is the relationship between Achilles and Odysseus, not between them, but between them and the idea of heroism, because the Iliad can essentially be viewed as a story about Achilles, really, because it starts off with "Saying, O Muses, of the rage of Achilles." He is the main focus, it sort of revolves around him. And the Odyssey, again, sort of Odysseus is the main focus of that, he's named after him. And they are both very definitely Greek heroes, but they're heroes in very different ways, and there is a theme of storytelling that runs within that, and I find that very interesting. So I'm going to ramble about it, and I hope it makes sense. Achilles represents the pinnacle of heroism as it is shown in the Iliad. He is the hero of Kleos. Kleos is a word that you can sort of translate to glory, although it has a lot of connotations associated with it. For example, when you read the Iliad, there is a lot of discussion of the sort of spoils of war and how they are distributed, because things like gold and slaves and all that sort of stuff is physical manifestations of someone's kleos, of their glory and of their worth as a soldier. But another way that kleos manifested itself is in this idea of storytelling. The idea that people will sing about your deeds for generations. Achilles is the prime example of what kleos means. Kleos means that you might have an incredibly short life, but you burn very brightly for a very short amount of time, and your deeds are so great that you might be dead, but your name will live on for generations, and that's worth dying for. There's a point in Book 9 where Achilles, and you can debate how much of a choice he has in the matter, etc., but essentially he has to choose between Will he stay in Troy, fully aware of the fact that he will die, but his name will live on for generations, and he will achieve a sort of immortality in that way? Or will he take the view that he's been disrespected, it's not his fight, and will he go home and live a very long life, but be forgotten, and when he dies no one will sing his name? As you will be aware, he chooses the first option, and we're still talking about him to this day, and in a way he definitely has achieved kleos, because we still talk about the Iliad, we still sing his songs, we still remember the name of Achilles and his deeds. That's Achilles' type of heroism. Odysseus is a completely different type of hero, which is sort of why they kind of don't mesh very well to each other in a lot of portrayals of them in literature. Odysseus is a very different type of hero to Achilles, because one of his primary motivations is to survive, and Achilles is a hero of fighting and of action, whereas Odysseus, although he does prove himself in fighting and in action and all that sort of stuff, he is primarily a hero of speech and of words. It's recurring throughout all of his things that he uses his words and his intelligence either to talk his way out of things or to trick people. He is the master of words, essentially. Odysseus definitely achieves kleos because, again, we are still talking about him to this day. His deeds are sung about and he has achieved glory. But he does it through a different way to Achilles, because he does it through not just his deeds, but his words. Usually with epics, the muses are invoked in the beginning, and it's set up so that the singer has drawn on the power of the gods, and they are telling the tale. Whereas a lot of the Odyssey is actually Odysseus telling his own story to listeners, which is really interesting already, because if you take storytelling as an act of power and control over the narrative, the fact that Odysseus is the one imparting his story, he is the architect of his own kleos. You need a fundamental aspect of kleos is the idea that people will talk about you. It's not enough to just do the deeds and have them be done. They have to be remembered. And Achilles is entirely reliant on other people doing this, which is why he needs to burn so brightly so that no one will ever forget and they will always tell his tales. Odysseus takes control of his own narrative. He is the teller of his tales. How much we can trust what he says is debatable, because he is a very tricky man and he gets out of situations by lying. In a way, all these things he's saying might not be true, but you become part of his singing of his kleos by the fact that he tells you the things and then you repeat them and we still talk about them, and I don't know if it's making any sense. He weaves his own kleos, is what I'm trying to say. He uses his words, he sings his own songs, he melds together the idea of kleos as heroic actions and kleos as people talking about them, and he brings them together himself, and he doesn't rely on other people to do it, and he engineers his own heroism, kind of, if that makes sense. Now, that's where this comes into play. Our main character is not Odysseus in this. This is not a rewriting of the Odyssey where Odysseus is female. This is a book where the main character is called Pen. I'm going to make a logic leap, I'm not very far into it so I could be wrong, that Pen is based on Penelope, based on the name similarities there. Which is fundamentally super interesting, because in this one, it is Penelope who is telling the stories, and it is Penelope who is in control of the power of words. In the Odyssey, when Odysseus comes back home, he is in disguise as a beggar in order to see what everything has been like since he's left, if it's safe for him, and all of this sort of stuff. Penelope doesn't recognise him, or doesn't recognise him, whatever. There's a whole debate on, does she not recognise him, or does she recognise him, and she's smart enough to go along with it, spins a tale about how she's been waiting and holding out against these suitors, and all these things, and eventually tricks Odysseus into revealing himself, / confirming that he is actually her husband, because in that way she is seen as the virtuous woman, if anything the antithesis of Helen who abandoned her husband and went to Troy and caused this war. On the flip side, you have her sister Penelope, who stayed at home, didn't just stay at home, but stayed faithful, not just for the 10 years of the Trojan War, but for the so many years it took Odysseus to come back again at the end of it all. She stayed faithful, and in this way, there can be no punishment for her. She will be, she welcomes Odysseus back, and the punishment that is reaped on the suitors and the maids who conspired with them, she is absolved from that because it's nothing to do with her. And this might be true in that world, or it might be her being very clever and engineering it so it looks that way. But it's very interesting, and it shows Penelope as someone who is a good match for Odysseus because she also has power over her words and control over narrative and storytelling. Which is why, back to the book in hand, that is the point of all of this, it's why I'm very interested in this. This isn't massive spoilers, but it is tiny just where I'm at with the plot, but I am very early on in the plot, so I don't know if this is spoilery or not. The interactions with the sirens in this book I have found very interesting as a start point. Pen is with someone called Hex, and they've encountered the sirens, and they're drawn towards the sirens, and in the Odyssey, Odysseus straps himself to the wheel of his ship. All the rest of his crew have wax in their ears so they can't hear the sirens, and he hears them, and he straps himself to the boat. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing a visual representation of strapping yourself to a mast? That's not necessary. He straps himself to the mast so he can hear the song, but he won't act on it. What I find very interesting about this is Pen and Hex get drawn to the sirens. Pen uses the rope to knot it around Hex's wrists and lead him away from the sirens with the phrase, hang on, come on, I'll tell you a story. This is super interesting to me because she's not having to tie herself to a mast to be able to resist them. She's somehow able to do that, and she uses the power of storytelling to take Hex away with her, to override the call of the sirens, and to carry on. And I don't know if this has been interesting to anyone but me, or if this has just been a complete nerd out on my behalf, but I'm finding this very interesting. I know that this book has a lot to say about gender and that sort of thing because I heard good things. I really like discourses on gender and sexuality anyway. I find that very interesting, and I particularly like it when it is put in the context of mythology, because these are the founding narratives that have, we might not think that they've shaped our culture where we're at now, but they did, and they were so influential on literature and art and all of these wonderful things that we value and that are important to our culture. These myths influenced them, and they are like the founding narratives that we built up in order to explain the world and how it all works, and it's all fabulous and interesting. And so I love it when people take this as a start point and they work off discourses on gender and sexuality into it, because it just, just love it. Okay, I really hope that this has made sense or something. I really want to start talking about more classical studies type stuff on this channel, and generally, you know, stuff that I find interesting that I haven't really talked about yet. So I'm going to actually make my lunch now, and then so that I will have eaten before my lunch break finishes. But I hope you're having a really nice day, and I'm really enjoying this book.